back into this series, Rest Easy. We began this series back in the beginning of September, Labor Day Sunday, to be clear about that. And so we went through all of September and learning about, what is this series, Rest Easy? And it really comes down to this, that hurry is all around us. And I don't know about you guys, but that's kind of ironic, really. The more I've looked into this and talked about hurry in our culture, like the more I feel like I'm in a hurry. I was trying to brush my teeth and drink a cup of coffee this morning at the same time, and I was in a hurry, and I actually thought that I chipped a tooth. I'm not joking at all. Like for a few minutes, I had to look in the mirror and did I just chip my tooth? Because I was trying to do two things. I don't know why I'm brushing my teeth with coffee in my hand, but it's just one of those things. So, but I'm always in a hurry, and I have found that even doing this series has made me feel like I'm more in a hurry, and maybe I'm just noticing it more. Maybe that's really what it is, that I'm just noticing that I'm more in a hurry. But we've been talking about this, and most of us might realize that we're busy. Our society is moving at an incredible speed. We've been living in the digital age since 2007, thanks to the intervention of the iPhone and Steve Jobs, and then everything else that came after that. And most of us would probably say we have no spare time. We just don't have any spare time. We're overbooked, we're overworked, we're overtired, and quite frankly, we're depleted. Anybody in that club with me? Okay. But that's kind of where I would say, maybe you don't feel like that's you personally, but I would say, generally speaking, I think that's where society is right now. A lot of people are just tired. And we came out of a pandemic where we had like a 2-year break. We had a break from it all. And we were so comfortable with that. Like, oh, it's so good. Like we can actually kind of just put things on pause. And the pandemic, as we've come out of it and gotten back to our normal lives, all of that busyness is just picked right back up, and the hurry is back upon us. So just a quick kind of recap here. We're talking about this because in this book that is really the supplemental reading, if you want to pick this up, you still can. You can order it on Amazon or christianbook.com. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And I know some of you are reading along with me. As we kind of dove into this, and really the premise of the book is that John Ortberg, a very well-known pastor and author at a mega church in California, felt like his life was spinning out of control. And so he reached out to his mentor, Dallas Willard, and he asked Dallas, he said, Dallas, what do I have to do to be the me who I want to be? And this is what Dallas Willard said to John Ortberg. He said, hurry is the great enemy of spirituality in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And so that's really the premise for this whole series, trying to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from life. So a quick recap. Week number 2, we talked about hurry sickness. That there's really this condition called hurry sickness. And this wasn't just recently diagnosed. This came from a cardiologist in the 1950s who was looking at people who were more prone to heart attacks. And this cardiologist kind of defined this whole symptom of saying, this whole condition saying that there's hurry sickness. And with hurry sickness, there's 10 different symptoms. We talked about these. Maybe you might recognize some of these. Irritability, hypersensitivity, restlessness, workaholism, emotional numbness, out of order priorities, lack of care for your body, trying to brush your teeth with a cup of coffee in your hand. Escapist behaviors, slippage of spiritual disciplines, and isolation. These are all symptoms of having hurry sickness in your life. But Jesus knew that we'd be facing these things. He was not absent-minded of what we would be up against 2,000 years ago. And so he spoke right into this condition of hurry sickness. And he said this in Mark chapter 8, verse 36. Jesus said, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? Do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? That's kind of a rhetorical question, I believe, that Jesus is asking, because he knows the answer, and he knows that we know the answer. You can strive for everything. You can go everywhere. You can be with everyone. You can try to grab it all. But really, what are you going to gain if you do all of that and yet still lose your own very soul at the end of it? So Jesus has really given us this understanding that life is about choices. And he wants us to know that our choices bring both benefits and consequences. And choosing to follow Jesus is actually a choice that comes with great benefits. There are both present benefits and there are also eternal benefits. I think Christianity sometimes we might fall into this trap of saying like it's all about heaven. We just think about the eternal benefits of choosing to follow Jesus. That it's all about you get this afterlife with him and you get to go to heaven and you get to be with him and and it's just a great place to be. Who wouldn't want to go to heaven? And we put all of our focus on heaven and rightly so. Heaven is going to be a great place. I would love to do a series sometimes on heaven because we are given so many descriptors of heaven in the Bible, of what it's going to be like. But oftentimes when looking at only heaven, we miss some of the things that Jesus said about following him and what that means for now and the present life. And what are the benefits of following Jesus both here and now? And so Jesus actually gives us an invitation. This again is the foundation of this series. It comes from Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30 in the contemporary English version. Jesus said, if you are tired from carrying heavy burdens, come to me and I will give you rest. Take the yoke I give you, put it on your shoulders and learn from me. I am gentle, I am humble, and you will find rest. This yoke is easy to bear, and this burden is light. And so this is really where we get the title, Rest Easy, because this is something that Jesus is walking with us into. He wants to lead us into this kind of a life. This is the life that Jesus wants to give us. It's not a life that's burdened down. It's not a life that has heavy weight or hurried pace. Jesus was clear. He talks about having a different weight and a different pace when we follow him. Something that's different than the world around us. A different weight and a different pace. And so 2 weeks ago, we began looking at the solution for hurry. Like, is there really any hope for this? Like, we know it's real. Like, I can convince you of that maybe, and we know it's all around us. But is there hope? Is there really any relief? Like, how do we step out of it? Is there any help for us? And the good news is that Jesus gives us a different kind of teaching, because we talked about Jesus as a rabbi. He's Savior. He's Messiah. He's the Son of God. But he's also a rabbi. And to be a rabbi means that you're a teacher. And Jesus was a teacher. He actually went into the synagogues. He taught. He had people listening to him regularly. And every rabbi had like their own set of teachings, much like pastors do today. Like, we have doctrines and things that we agree to, and we have a belief system that we adhere to and we incorporate, but each pastor kind of has their own twist and their own way of presenting and teaching and their passions and their visions that the Lord has given them. And Jesus was no different. Jesus had his own teaching as well. And what he's saying here is that my teaching is different, because all the other rabbis you've been listening to, they have a heavy burden for you. They have things that you can't meet up to. In fact, they're actually impossible. You're not going to be able to do the things that these rabbis are putting on your shoulders. But Jesus comes and says, I have a different teaching, and these teachings are called yokes. So it's not just an agricultural implement that ties animals together, but it's also a teaching. Jesus says, I have a different teaching, a lighter teaching. A teaching that won't burden you down as much. It's actually going to bring rest into your life. And like rabbis of the day, that they were looking for people to follow them, and you would want to be a rabbi's apprentice. When you found a rabbi that you agreed with, or that kind of like had the same outlook on things as you did, like you would want to be their apprentice or disciple, and you would go through a number of steps to become their apprentice, and many would not qualify. They'd be pushed away. They wouldn't make the cut. And so Jesus said something that was very clear, and it's actually clear to us today. He said this in John chapter 15. He said, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you. And I've appointed you, and I've placed you. I've purposely planted you so that you would go and bear fruit and keep on bearing, and that your fruit will remain and be lasting, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he's going to give it to you. He's going to bless your life, really, is what he's saying. The Father will bless your life because I'm calling you. I'm choosing you to be my disciple. This is really the foundation of Christianity. The grace of God upon us, that God would choose us, that God would make himself known to us in Jesus Christ to come follow him. That we don't have to sit and wonder and try to configure what's true and what's not true. Jesus says, no, I'm choosing you to come into my presence. Follow me, be with me. Understand that this is a calling on your life. Jesus has chosen us. And with this choosing comes the opportunity to follow him like an apprentice would, to learn from him, to become like him, to do what he would do, to do as he would do if he were not here. It's an invitation that's really life-changing because we're being molded. We're being transformed to become like the teacher, the rabbi. We're apprenticing under him. In that same chapter in John chapter 15, this is all review, I know, but I want to bring you up to where we are today because this is all important. In that same chapter in John chapter 15, Jesus said, I am the vine and you are the branches, and my Father is the gardener. He's the one who takes care of it all. And if you think about this imagery, this beautiful imagery of a vineyard, and vines connected to a branch, that they don't grow by lying flat on the ground and spreading out. They grow because they're held up by a structure. And in this imagery, Jesus doesn't address the structure specifically, but we have to understand that there has to be a structure to help us grow. And we talked 2 weeks ago about margin in our life. Creating margin, creating time and space where you can grow stronger, and that connection to the vine gets stronger and healthier. And it exists for eternity. It's not just a short thing that breaks and goes away. It's like, no, this is a long-lasting connection, and Jesus wants us to know this. That we need time and space. We need a structure that's going to actually support our growth in Jesus Christ. That's important to know in our Christian walk. And so this brings us up to today, where we are now. Where are we? We come to a place where I think we can start focusing on building the structure. What does the structure look like in your life? What's the structure that will support our connection to Jesus? What's the structure that will ease our burden, ease the weight that we're carrying, and also slow down our pace that we've been trying to keep up with? So we're going to build in some practical steps into our lives that are going to help us with the structure, help us to follow Jesus, help us to have a lighter load, help us to have a slower pace. So are you ready to build?
Yep.
All right, well, here we are. So this whole month, we just went through September, flashcard, September, right there. This whole month, October, we're going to look at 4 spiritual disciplines. We're going to look at 4 things that I think we can build into our structure to say, if I can include these in my life, and this isn't about doing more, because that's why we talked 2 weeks ago about margin. You can't just add this all on top of all the other things you're trying to juggle in life right now. This isn't just another plate for you to put in the air, along with the 10 other ones you're already trying to juggle. Margin means you have to get rid of some of those things. You have to eliminate some things in your life that don't belong. Hopefully, you've given that some strong consideration. We're going to continue to talk about that. That will be an ongoing opportunity for you. But we're going to create some structure that's going to come into your life. It's going to help. These spiritual disciplines, we're going to call them. And the first one is this: silence and solitude. Silence and solitude. Isn't this exciting? I'm going to be really upfront with you guys. This is a difficult message. This is a difficult teaching. It's difficult to understand. It's difficult for me to talk about, and I can tell you, as an expert, there are things I can talk about that I would say that I've become an expert in. This is not one of them. So I don't even feel qualified, really, to talk about this. This is a hard thing. Silence and solitude. There's really 2 qualifiers we need to understand about this before we move further. The first one is this: we must be ruthless about this. Remember, Dallas Willard said to John Ortberg, we must be ruthless. This isn't just like a casual thought. This isn't just like wishful thinking. We have to be ruthless about incorporating spiritual disciplines into our life. And you didn't know this. I'm not always pointing my finger at the world, but the world is not in your favor in this, okay? Society at large, all around us, is not supportive of this, okay? You need to know that. We're going against the flow right now. We're going upstream against all this, the current. It's not in your favor. So it requires a ruthless attempt. And Paul says things like this in 1 Corinthians 9. And he says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way to get the prize. Everyone who competes goes into strict training. That's what Paul said to the church at Corinth. This is really about having some strict training in your life. And I'm so glad, I look around our church body, We have some seasoned Christians in our family, amen? We have people who've been following the Lord for years. You've known the Lord and his goodness in your life. And I think some of the times we buy into the lie of like, I'm as strong as I'm going to get. I'm as following as closely as I'll ever follow. And I just don't think that's true. I think there's always more room to grow. There's always a closeness that we can broach with the Lord and get closer to him. And that's what part of this is about. So you have to be ruthless about it. It involves, as Jesus said, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It requires all of you. It's 100%. And there's going to be part of you that's going to want to rebel at this. And maybe some of you already are right now. You're just like rejecting this. You're like, nah, this isn't for me. I don't know why I came today. This is not my thing. Like, this is like monastic type stuff. Like, Dan needs to go to a monastery because this is where he belongs right now. And I don't need to be here. And I know part of you is probably actually having thoughts of like, there's a struggle going on right now. Like, I don't like this. Like, I don't want silence and solitude. I don't know how to do this. Like, this is crazy kind of stuff. And we're going to go a little bit further here because you're going to see some things that are really, really unique about this. The second thing you need to know about this is you're not going to do this alone. Although silence and solitude sounds like being alone, you're not going to do this alone. You're not going to be able to build these spiritual disciplines into your life all by yourself. And a primary partner with you on this is God himself. You have your part, and God has his part. And this is not about working, for self-transformation. This is not about self-help. It's not about, just positive thinking. It's not about just trying some techniques that are considered like New Age meditation. That's none of those kinds of things. This is about partnering with God, the Lord God Almighty, and he's already working in you with this. He's prepared many things for you to get to this point. So this structure we're going to build, you're not going to do it alone. God is going to partner with us. And if you're being honest with yourself, many of us right now, we're trying to decide if this is really a good idea. Will it really change my life? Do I really need spiritual disciplines? Here's just two quotes from kind of some fathers of the faith, modern Christianity. Henry Nouwen said this: without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and listen to him. That's a quote up there. And then the second quote is from Richard Foster. Richard Foster is a theologian. He's a Quaker Orient. Henry Nouwen is a Catholic priest and professor. And Richard Foster said this: in contemporary society, by the way, I think he said this in the 1970s, in contemporary society, our adversary majors in three things: noise, hurry, and crowds. If he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, those are his words, not mine, he will rest satisfied. How true those words were when Richard Foster said them, and even more so now. That we have an adversary who really likes to throw noise and hurry and crowds at us. So considering silence and solitude, we have to consider the life of Jesus. We have to consider what his life was like. And often we hear the stories about Jesus and his interactions, all the people he encountered, all the places he went, all the miracles he performed. And we pull those out of Scripture, and we somehow promote those, and we showcase those and say, all these things that Jesus did. And certainly Jesus was awesome. He did amazing miracles. He said amazing things to people. He went amazing places and showed people things. And we showcased all of this. But as we do that, you know what we're also missing? We're missing how Jesus lived day to day, in and out. He was in the mountains, but he was also in the valleys. We miss some of these things. There's a Greek word for this kind of silence and solitude we see in Jesus. And the Greek word is this: eremos. Eremos. It appears all throughout the New Testament Gospels in the Greek. What does eremos mean? It means desert, deserted place, desolate place, solitary place, lonely place, quiet place. And my particular favorite, wilderness. Eremos. This is where Jesus was. This is where he lived. This is where he went. More than 30 times this word is used in the Gospels. And most of them are in reference to Jesus' personal decisions of how he would choose to live day to day, how he was getting by. He was in the uttermost. Here's a storyline for you, and you can look at Mark chapter 1 if you want to take a quick look at this. In Mark chapter 1, Mark's gospel, Jesus is beginning his ministry at the age of 30. And he's starting to go public with his ministry. And John the Baptist baptized him. And it's a beautiful event. And after Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist, we see in Mark chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, it says that at once the Spirit sent him into the wilderness, the uttermost. And he was in the wilderness, the uttermost, 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and the angels attended to him. This is where Jesus went. Jesus went to the desolate place, the deserted place, the lonely place, the quiet place. This was nothing short of silence and solitude for Jesus. We have no indication that anyone else was with Jesus except the Spirit of God. He was there for 40 days, and we can make the proper assumption that he was also there for 40 nights. I was thinking about this last night as it was raining outside and the temperature was dropping, and I'm hitting my thermostat button on my furnace, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, like, what was it really like for Jesus to go out into the wilderness? And I love how Mark's gospel says it's like he's not even out there alone, he's out there with wild animals. Like, I mean, can you just imagine what that was like for him? Jesus, the Son of God, human flesh. He's entering the most grueling stretch of his life. He's going to have 3 years of ministry that's going to be nothing but like people pressing in and trying to get his attention. He's then going to be arrested, crucified, executed. There will be death. There will be resurrection. And the way that he prepares for this is by 40 days, almost a month and a half. He's just going to go off by himself into the uttermost, into the desolate place. If you keep reading in Mark chapter 1, you'll see that this is not an isolated incident. This isn't just a one-time thing that Jesus did. In fact, after these 40 days, he calls his disciples to him, Mark chapter 1. His disciples come to him, and they head to this town called Capernaum. And he arrives there on the Sabbath day. He goes straight into the synagogue, because remember, he's a rabbi. And so he goes in to teach in the synagogue. And he's there, and we don't know how long he was preaching, but I imagine it wasn't a short message. I think it's a full morning for him. It's a busy morning. And he's there, and then he finishes teaching, and then we're told that just then, almost like right after the service, that this man with an evil spirit comes into him and confronts him, comes to the front of Jesus and confronts him face to face, and Jesus takes care of the evil spirit. And then it says that as they were leaving, they headed over to Simon and Andrew's home. And I'm sure they're going to get some Sunday dinner, They had a roast in the oven or something. And so they go over to Simon's mother-in-law, and she's actually very ill at the time. And Jesus heals her. And he spends time with the family. He gives his day to being with the family. And then that evening, because people had heard about this evil man who had a demon possession kicked out of him, they heard about all the things that Jesus was doing. And Jesus is in his home just hanging out with Simon and Andrew's mother-in-law. He had healed her. And all of a sudden, all these people start coming. And they're pressing in around him. They start bringing their friends and family who also need healing. They're coming for their own healing. It was a very busy day for Jesus. Notice what happens next. Mark chapter 1, verse 35. It says that very early in the morning, this is the next day, while it was still dark, Jesus got up. He left the house. He went off to a solitary place, and he prayed. Jesus went into the uttermost. You say, well, how? Like, isn't that rude? Like, all these people were needing him. Like, isn't that, like, mean? Like, he's just being selfish. Like, why would he do that? Like, I'm sure all these people came to see him, and there's more healing to happen. There was more that needed to be done. Hurry up, Jesus. Come on, hurry up, Jesus. There's more coming. Let's get through this line of people. We got more coming today. Come on, Jesus. Jesus gets up. I don't even know if anybody else was awake. Coffee pot hadn't even started yet. It says he got up, and before the sunlight even, it was still dark. he went off to the Eremos. I highlight this because I want you to see how intentional it had to be for Jesus. This isn't just happening as they're walking down the road and Jesus sees a bench and says, oh, this is a good place. Let's sit down here. I need to catch my breath for a few minutes and let's just take a break. It's not like that. Very intentionally, ruthlessly, as Dallas Willard would say, Jesus had silence and solitude. He needed it. He found it. You might think this is only just, again, kind of a one-time thing. Well, let me read a few other things. Mark chapter 6, verse 31 says that so many people were coming and going that day that they did not have enough chance to eat. So Jesus said to me, come with me by yourself to a quiet place and let's go get some rest. So they got in a boat and they went to a solitary place. Mark chapter 6. Matthew chapter 14, when Jesus heard what had happened about the death of his friend John the Baptist, it says that Jesus withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. I imagine in that instance that Jesus is in a boat by himself. I mean, it says privately. I take that literally. He's gone off by himself in a boat. He needed some time, solitude, and silence. Matthew chapter 17, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and they went up on a high mountain by themselves. You know about that? The Mount of Transfiguration. Kind of a quiet place. Luke chapter 5, verses 15 and 16 says the news about Jesus spread all around the area, so much so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. Luke 5, verse 16. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. He often withdrew to the Eremos to go and pray. Silence and solitude. They showed up often in the life of Jesus. How do we miss it? How do we miss these moments? Jesus made it a point, a habit, even a practice. It was part of his rhythm of life. It was part of how he lived in the ebb and flow of the busyness and the need for quietness. The need to be with people, but also the need to be alone with his Father. There's a rhythm to all of this. I think sometimes we like to look at Jesus and immediately think, well, he was the Son of God. Like, he was special. He had these superpowers, and, these were things he needed to do to charge his superpowers up, and this is something that was only for him. But let me remind you that Jesus was both fully God and fully human. There's a human need in his life to have silence and solitude. The same human need that you have in your life to be alone with the Father in silence and solitude. We have to look at it that way. And notice this wasn't just because Jesus didn't have anything else to do. Jesus had a lot to do. He had more to do than you have to do. Okay? And he knew he needed this in his life. And so he found a way to have it. He gave significant time and effort to silence and solitude. So the question comes, well, how can we actually build this discipline into our life? How can we actually build this kind of discipline, this silence and solitude? How do I do it? What do I have to do to build this? The first one is this. It comes from Psalm chapter 46, verse 10. The psalmist says, be still and know that he is God. This is the voice of God. Be still and know that I am God. Okay, so what am I supposed to do here? Let me tell you. Nothing. You say, Dan, that's crazy. No, I want to tell you this. Here's what you have to do for silence and solitude in your life. Nothing. You don't have to do anything. You're just being still. You're being quiet. You are putting yourself in front of God. Do nothing. That's the whole point of this. That there's nothing that's going to be more important in your life than being still and being with God. Nothing will trump that. But also, let me say, this is the most challenging thing and the hardest discipline to grasp, because we are living in a society that is telling us that there's always more to do. There's always something that has to be done. If you have 30 seconds, you should check your email. You should text somebody. You need to put a list together of all the things you have to do tomorrow, because the world is giving us that message, and God gives us a very different message. that he wants us to come in front of him and be still and do nothing. How do you have a lighter load and a slower pace? You do nothing. This is hard for me to say as a pastor, but I'm giving you permission, actually, to do nothing, okay? Do nothing, all right? It is a challenge to know that, just to be still and to know that he is God for extensive amounts of time. Choose silence in your life. No listening to a podcast, no TV, no Netflix, no unnecessary noise, no work, no unloading the dishwasher, thank you, God. No folding laundry, no cooking, no organizing, no fixing, no Facebooking, no Instagramming, no Googling, no etc., 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 etc. Do nothing. John Ortberg said this: stillness is always a prerequisite for receptivity. Stillness is always a prerequisite for receptivity. Do you want to receive from God? Do you want to know a truth from God? Do you want encouragement from God? Do you want strength from God? Do you want wisdom from God? Do you want peace in your life from God? The key is stillness. Being still will create a conduit in your life to receive from God. It's intentional. Intentional stillness. The second one is this. It comes from Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Whatever is, think about such things. Now, what is the ... there? How many of you know Philippians 4, verse 8 and 9? Anybody know it by heart? Pure, true, noble, right, good. Yeah. Praiseworthy. That's, yeah, excellent. Praiseworthy. Whatever those things are. True, noble, right, pure, lovely. How can we forget that one? Admirable, excellent, praiseworthy. Whatever those things are in your life, think about those things. That's what Paul tells us. He says, dwell on the good things. Think about all those good things that God has poured into your life. That's how you get a lighter load. That's how you get a slower pace. By focusing your thoughts on the good things. How many of us know that anxiety, panic, heart rate increases when we don't do this? When we think about the bad things in our life. When I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's not because I'm thinking about something good in my life. It's because I have thoughts on other things. Things that aren't good. God knows this about us. He's giving us this insight. He's helping us out here. Think about the good things. Focus on those things. And then thirdly, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. We're instructed to make the most of every opportunity. We've talked about this in previous weeks, about using your time wisely, Paul said here in Ephesians chapter 5. This is about habits. It's about putting yourself under a microscope and looking at the habits that you have in your life. And understanding that you're supposed to make the most of every opportunity. And part of that means decreasing bad habits and increasing good habits. And understanding, like, what are the things in your life that actually don't belong? I want to read directly from Eugene Peterson's translation here, The Message. I just love the way he says this in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 11 to 17. Peterson says this: don't waste your time on useless work, mere busy work, the barren pursuits of darkness. Expose these things for the sham they are. It's a scandal when people waste their lives on things they must do in the darkness where no one will see it. Rip the cover off those frauds and see how attractive they look in the light of Christ. Wake up from your sleep. Climb out of your coffins. Christ will show you the light. So watch your step. Use your head. Make the most of every chance you get. These are desperate times. Don't live carelessly, unthinkingly. Make sure you understand what the Master wants. Wow, what a good word for us to close with today. Make sure you understand what the Master wants. Don't waste your time. There's a few things we can think about here as we wrap this up. And talking about habits and understanding, like, how much do your habits cost you? In the book that we've been reading the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he does us a favor, and he includes some statistics for us. Let me just share a few of these with us this morning. The average guy, by the age of 21, spends 10,000 hours on video games. Sorry, guys. That's 417 days. The average American spends 705 hours on social media per year. That's 29 days. I think I'm a little bit more than that. I know I am. The average American spends 2,738 hours watching TV each year. That's 114 days. That's a lot. And today, the average iPhone user is on their phone 2.5 hours a day. A question that was given by Microsoft to young adults found that when they were asked the question, when nothing is occupying my attention, the first thing I do is reach for my phone. 80% of young adults answered yes to that question. When there's nothing else to do, I reach for my phone. 8 out of 10 of us would probably say yes to that. We're in a constant sense of trying to depend on things to fill our attention. I love how the author says here that there's a phrase that is never used anymore, and I grew up saying it a lot. Maybe you said it as well. I'm bored. How many of us have ever said, I'm bored? He says that phrase has actually been eliminated from our conversations. Nobody says they're bored anymore. I mean, I remember being bored, literally being bored. To tears sometimes, okay? Nobody's bored anymore. We've been filled up with so many things, we don't even know how to be bored. It's constant attention. If this is a challenge for you, if you say, I don't know how I'm going to do this, like, I don't know that I can even think about silence, I don't know what I'm going to do. If you say that's just completely impossible for you, I want to give you a few tips, okay? A few things. Just to help you along. Not more to do, but just to help you along. The first one is this. Just recapture your love of reading. Just pick up. I intentionally do not use Kindle or any electronic device to read. You know why? Because there's a temptation for me. If I'm reading on my iPad, you know what else I'm doing on my iPad? Scrolling, checking updates, looking at what other people are doing. If I'm reading with a book, I'm dedicated to this book. And that's all I want. I don't always win at that, but it's all I want. So recapture a love of books and of reading. Try that. You can also recapture the discipline of intentional prayer. Praying, even out loud. You know, when Jesus went to the Eremos, you know what he was doing? Praying. For 40 days, it says he was actually fasting and praying. There was a purpose to going to the wilderness. And part of that purpose for Jesus was praying. I ask you this question. If you were just to give up 15 minutes of doing something each day, can you imagine how many people you could pray for? How many people could you pray for in 15 minutes? How many people could you pray for in a week if you were to give up 15 minutes a day for praying? I was thinking about this yesterday. I thought, I think I could actually cover almost everybody I know in 15 minutes a day for a week. People I really know their needs. I know what they're really going through. I think I could do that. What would that do to your connectedness to God? What would that do to your structure of actually understanding God's will for people and praying the blessings into their life? Here's another thing. You could regularly make going outside part of your day. Go for a walk, go for a run. Just go outside. Get some fresh air. There are a few days, once in a while, not often, but there are a few days where I don't leave my house. Something happened a couple of weeks ago. I was working on something at home, and Krista came home, and she said, "What'd you do today?" I said, it was funny. I'm embarrassed to admit this in front of you. I was still in my pajamas, okay? Late afternoon. And I said to Krista, you're not going to believe this. I got so much done today, but I didn't leave my house. And I just, all of a sudden, this guilt came over me because I'm I love being outside. I love fresh air. And I realized, I just missed something in this day that God had for me because I chose to stay inside all day. But go outside. And if you do, I encourage you this. Don't take your phone with you. Can you actually go outside without any kind of connected device? And can you be with God and still with him in nature? All right, a few more things. Encourage you to think about this. if you watch more than an hour of TV each day, then set aside a day each week where you just say, there's no TV today. I try to limit my TV viewing to 1 hour a day, and that includes a half-hour news segment, and some half-hour show that I'm just going to entertain myself with. But I try to limit myself to an hour a day of TV. But I think about what would it be like if I went with no TV? Could I do that? That's a challenge for some of us. Or if you commute in your car every day and you always have your radio on, can you pick a day where you just choose not to turn on your radio? You want silence and solitude? Put yourself in this cavity of a car and just say, I'm not going to have any distractions while I'm driving. You can't text anyways. You're not supposed to be. I drive a lot and I see people on their phone all the time, but you're not supposed to be. But drive in your car with no noise or distractions. And while you're doing that, can you pray? Could you pray for that time while you're driving? There's nothing wrong with driving and praying at the same time, as long as you keep your eyes open. Okay. Friday night, I had to go over to Staples to pick up this fancy newsletter that you have. And I left my home at about 7 o'clock and went over to Hanover, from Gettysburg to Hanover, and drove back, and I made a choice not to turn the radio on for that hour's worth of time. I prayed the whole time to Hanover and back. I want to tell you this, not a boasting or bragging, I'm just telling you, I felt so refreshed getting home because I just spent an hour in prayer. And I prayed for you all. I prayed for every need that came to my mind while I was driving. And it was one of the best feelings I've had all week, to spend an hour in my car just talking to God and working it out with Him. Try it sometime. Just try it. See what happens. Here's one last thing. This is going to be a tough one. This is especially tough for me. Pick a day each week when you choose not to have any social media. You just shut all your social media. You don't get on it at all. You just make a very conscious decision. I'm not getting on social media today. You know as well as I do, it's a rabbit hole. Choose a day, pick a day where you say, I'm not getting on social media today. And use that time for silence and solitude to be with your God. All right, one more closing thought. Eremos can seem like a bad thing. It can seem like it's actually a thing we avoid. Like, who wants to go to the wilderness? Who wants to go to the desert? Why would we do that? But I want to tell you that for Jesus, it wasn't a bad thing. We might look at it as a place of emptiness. For Jesus, it was a place of fullness. For Jesus, it was a place He could go to and be filled up. And we know this. Jesus was countercultural. Jesus did things that didn't make sense in the world's eyes. Like, why would somebody do this? Why would somebody choose to ignore all the pleasures of this life and just go out into the wilderness? But Jesus did it because He knew the things of this world wouldn't satisfy Him. He knew the things of this world would leave Him empty. And so He knew that going to be with His Father and alone was the better option. And that's where He knew He'd be filled up. Amen. That's what God wants for you today. He wants you to consider being filled up by Him. He wants you to know that He's willing to do that with you. But I also believe, and I'm not going to find a lot of scripture to back this up, but it's just a gut feeling here. I believe that God doesn't like to compete for our attention. He really doesn't. I've seen it in my life. He's not going to compete with the things that you give a priority to. He wants to be your priority. I want to lead us in a prayer this morning, and part of this prayer is actually a moment for you to even just recognize some things that you've been chasing in life. We use the word confession to confess that there are some things in life that maybe you've been chasing after that have left you empty and unsatisfied. And just to recognize that those things, they don't belong. And to confess that to God and say, God, forgive me. I need to lay that aside. And then after the prayer, I want to invite you to come forward and just receive communion. And in a true act of trying to teach us something this morning, we're going to do communion in silence. No music, just you and the Lord, a few moments of silence.